Hi, I'm Toney Armstrong, Director of Police Services. I want to spend a little time talking with you about the restructuring of our precinct boundaries and how it will affect your communities. Over the past year, the Memphis Police Department has been receiving an overview from the PERF, which is the Police Executive Research Forum. They have done a review of our department. They feel like we can be more efficient, we can be more proactive if we redrew our ward boundaries. Some of our precincts are not getting the same level of calls that our others are. It does not put our officers in a position where they can be proactive. Our officers, as it stands right now, as quickly as our officers can respond to one call and get in services, they're being dispatched to another call. The officers find it very, very difficult to get on the radio. It's very difficult for them to get on the radio. So imagine an officer attempting to call for help and only having a very limited amount of time to do that. And the traffic on the radio is just so heavy where he can't do that. So it's an officer safety issue with us also. Our Old Island station handles annually about 116,000 calls for service a year. You can see that if you compare that to the Ridgeway, which is out in our southeast part of town, they answer somewhere around 54,000 calls for services a year. So this is just an effort for us to redistrict our wards, redistrict our boundaries, precinct boundaries, so that we can level the playing field and offer all of our citizens, regardless of where they live, what neighborhood they live in, the same level of services. So each precinct now will have 6 wards. And again, that will afford us the opportunity to make sure that all our precincts have the same amount of resources and personnel. The complement of each precinct will be 145 officers per precinct. Again, that's the desired complement. Now that would fluctuate with officers being assigned to outside details, to outside investigative services. So that will fluctuate, but our desired complement is 145 officers per precinct. It's still, the shifts won't change. The only thing that would change is the shift number at South Main Station. South Main Station, as it stands right now, only has 3 shifts. They do not have a Delta shift, but we are adding a Delta shift at South Main, as well as adding additional personnel to fulfill that shift. Nothing is going to change as far as the level of services. We're not farming anything out. We're not contracting any of our work out. You're still going to be getting services from the Memphis Police Department, regardless of the redistricting of wards. It puts our officers back into a position where they actually can get out and do community policing. They don't necessarily have to be assigned to our COP unit to do that. It gives them an opportunity to get out and get familiar with the people in their wards, and get the people in the ward to get familiar with them. So again, this is an effort. You could actually keep those officers in those wards patrolling on a continual basis.
I'm John Williams, manager of the Crime Analysis Unit for the Memphis Police Department, here to talk a little bit about the methodologies used to determine the 2013 station and ward reconfiguration. Director Armstrong has already talked a little bit about the reasons behind this move, and now I'm here to perhaps shed a little bit more light on what was done to determine these areas. In the latter part of 2011, we were asked to pull data from our communications CAD system that pertained to calls for service. We were also asked to pull data from our records management system pertaining to offenses. We were then asked to overlay these areas to our current geographical boundaries and determine areas that would evenly disperse our manpower as well as our resources. For this presentation, we'll cover January 1 through December 31st for 2011 and January 1 through the end of August for 2012. Let's get started. The map before you is a map of the current precinct boundaries. It also shows where the location of each of the police stations within those boundaries. The next map is a map of the new precinct boundaries. And as you can see, some of our stations are going to lose some territory and some stations will gain territory. For example, if you look at the Old Island Station on the new map boundaries, you'll see where that station will lose territory south of I-40 along the I-40 North Corridor. Now I'm going to toggle between slides here, and if you focus your attention on an area that is of interest to you, you can easily see and identify the changes that will take place in the precincts. This is the current, this is the new. Current and new. Current and new. This slide shows the current precinct boundaries in the background with the red silhouette of the new precinct boundaries. And as you can see again, we spoke of Old Allen Station a few minutes ago, where Old Allen Station, the new boundary will become I-40. That territory south of I-40 will now become a portion of 3 precincts: the South Main Station, the Union Station, and a portion of Tillman Station. This information will also be available on the city website and also on the Real-Time Crime Center's website. Last Tuesday, we had the opportunity to present this information before the Public Safety Committee with the City Council members. We wanted to assure them that their council districts, while their council districts would not change, their precincts in which they serve and some wards in which they serve would change. This is a map of the council districts with the current precinct boundaries. This next slide shows the council districts with the new precinct boundaries. We wanted to show them also the super districts. This is the slide with the current precinct boundaries with the 2 super districts, Super District 8 and Super District 9. Well, this is a slide of the new precinct. Well, this is a slide of the new precinct boundaries with the 2 super districts as well. Concerning the methodology used to determine the new boundaries, we had to take in consideration man-made and natural boundaries, things such as waterways, railways, such as precinct boundaries. We wanted to make sure that, number one, we evenly disperse the call load and the offense load. Number two, we also wanted to make sure that officers had access to the new locations, and that can be an officer safety issue. And number three, we wanted to take in consideration the response time. When a citizen calls for a police, we wanted to make sure that we allowed for the fastest response time as possible. Again, we were able to pull from our computer-aided dispatch system calls for service from 2010, 2011, and from January to August for 2012. We were also able to extract records from our records management system for the same dates that were covered. For calls for service for the year of 2011, Old Allen Station responded to nearly 117,000 calls for service during that 12-month period. And if you look down, you see that we have some precincts or some stations who only responded to a mere 54,000 calls for service. When you also look at the number of calls per station, the average for the wards, you will see that there's a great discrepancy in the number of calls per ward, per station. The new boundaries reveal significantly evenly dispersed calls for service per precinct. What we have been able to do, we've been able to take from some precincts and add to others to evenly disperse our calls for service data. We also wanted to see, according to the current workload, the current amount of officers who staff per precinct the number of calls within a year. We took the total amount of calls for service and we divided it among the number of officers who currently staff each of our precincts. We did the same thing with our new precinct boundaries, and it will bring relief, as you can see on this slide, to several of the stations. Now, of course, the stations who were not handling as many calls, their calls per officer will increase. Now, let's take a moment to go over some of the key points concerning each of the stations. I have up before you Old Allen Station. With the old wards, you can see the total number here, nearly 117,000 calls for service for the year of 2011. We've evenly dispersed it on the lower portion of the screen with the new wards. We're going to relieve them of nearly 20,000 calls for service. Each of our stations will be manned by 6 wards. That evens out the manpower. Manpower will be evenly dispersed among each station. One station will not have more officers than another, and we think that this is the way to go. Let's take a look at Range Station. Again, up top are the numbers for the old ward shapefiles, and you can see the indiscrepancy here. We've got one ward, 221's ward, with a mere 7,823 calls for service for 2011, while we have another ward, 232's ward, with over 30,000 calls for service. Now, this is key and this is important. With 230, we were able to pretty much split that ward in two. And that ward will now become Ward 225 and 226. Those officers in this area now, by what we've done, we're able to provide more officers in an area that's a high crime area to respond to calls. When we free up officers from responding from call to call, we're able to put that officer in a position where he can patrol the areas. Let's take a look at Mount Moriah Station. Mount Moriah Station, under the old precinct and ward boundaries, they handle over 98,000 calls for service through 2011. With the new ward boundaries, we're going to take that down to approximately 83,000 calls for service. A portion of the eastern part of the old Mount Moriah Station will now become a portion of Ridgeway Station. A portion of the southwestern portion of Mount Moriah Station will also become a part of Ridgeway Station. So we're excited about that. Union Station, again, much discrepancy here in the total numbers of calls for services. Union Station handled over 105,000 calls for service for the year of 2011. With the new ward boundaries, we're going to cut that down approximately about maybe 10,000 calls for service. New precinct boundaries, you can see how evenly dispersed the calls for services are. Tillman Station reveals some interesting things about it. For 2011, we have 2 wards that are perhaps significantly lower than other wards within Tillman Station, and that being the current 526 and 528 ward. While 528 ward responded to 8,800 calls for service in 2011, as you look at the lower portion of the screen for Tillman Station under the new ward, you can see that we've evenly dispersed this, and we're also in the process reducing the number of calls for service according to the 2011 data for Tillman Station by some 11,000 calls for service. Moving on to South Main Station. South Main Station is unique in itself. South Main Station only recorded approximately 55,000 calls for service in 2011. But what we're doing, we're increasing its size to evenly disperse the workload and also our resources in that area. And now South Main Stations will be brought up to complement the rest of the city, the rest of the precincts, and should respond to approximately 75,000 calls for service. Moving on to Airway Station. Airway Station, again, is unique in itself. Some wards handling as high as 24,000 calls for service when you look at Ward 723 in the old way of doing things. But we've been able, through extracting the data and placing it in our mapping software and determining to evenly disperse the data, we've been able, and we predict that we can take off about 20,000 calls for service for Airway Station. Appling Farms. Appling Farms is another precinct that we believe, according to calls for service, that we can assist. We only received approximately 27,400 calls for service for the year of 2011. We're going to increase this sum, and that's going to go up to approximately 74,000 calls for service. And finally, Ridgeway Station. Ridgeway Station, they only had 4 wards in their precinct. Again, as I previously said, each of our stations now will be staffed with 6 wards. One of the interesting things about Ridgeway Station is the fact that Ward 923, perhaps one of the busiest wards in the entire city. Officers in that ward received over 33,000 calls for service in 2011. In adding the additional 2 wards to Ridgeway Station, if you look at the new, we're able to cut some of that. Now, the ward that will perhaps be the busiest, which will be Ward 924, will handle some 10,000 calls for service fewer than the year of 2011. We think that this is the right road to go. We have crunched the numbers, we've crunched the data, and yet while we can't predict what's going to happen in the upcoming years, we do believe that the best indicator for the future is what has taken place in the past. And we are constantly running data. We're constantly running figures to make sure that what we put in place is working. We will continue to monitor the situation after the change goes into effect quarterly. We will run data to see what is our response time from police. The average response time in the old way of doing things compared to the new way of doing things. I hope this has taken some of the reservedness out of your thought process, and we look forward to serving you.